Hey guys, Evrelia here. This is a guide to defeating the Spirit Kings on Heroic difficulty. The Spirit Kings on Heroic is probably the hardest encounter in Mogu'shan Vaults, mostly due to the ability for one player to wipe the raid and the randomness in which the order of the bosses spawn. On this fight on Heroic mode you always start with Kiang the Merciless up, but the order of the next 3 ads is random. Now with gear in the early stages, if you get anything other than Subutai the Swift second, it's almost impossible to defeat the encounter, so it's usually just faster to reset and try again. The ideal order for the ads on this encounter to spawn is Kiang, Subutai, Zhan and then Meng, but it can be done in the order of Kiang, Subutai, Meng and then Zhan. Now with gear upgrades it might be possible in any order, but for now you're better off just resetting if you get the wrong combination. Okay, so the first guy, Kiang, is all about people moving together and staying on top of your tank. Now the boss's melee attacks split damage amongst everyone they hit, so your ranged and healers need to be stood on the tank to help split the damage. When he casts Annihilate, everyone in front of him needs to run through him in order to avoid the damage. Now you could also have your tank face him away just before he casts Annihilate so that nobody has to move, but this can be dangerous because he might do a melee swing before Annihilate and your tank will then get one shot. For the flanking orders, we found it easiest to have the tank look around and call out which direction the entire group would move in: forwards, backwards, left or right. On Heroic you get 2 separate flanking orders, which makes it a lot harder to dodge. Now when your raid leader does call out which way to move, remember that everyone has to move together. Wait for the boss to do one melee swing and then everyone should move as quickly as possible. His new ability is a shield. Now this is a 2-second cast, and anyone that uses an ability on him while he has the shield up causes him to do an extra melee attack. Now you can remove this with Master Spell or Shattering Throw, and you should try and precast these abilities so that they land instantly once the shield is up so that it disappears immediately. But everyone else in the raid, wait for the animation to disappear before you start DPS. Always assume that it's not been dispelled instantly, because otherwise you'll probably wipe your raid. Now when this guy reaches 30%, the next king will become active, which is different from normal mode. Now the transitions are the hardest parts of the fight because you have 2 mobs alive at the same time. This is where all your DPS cooldowns need to be used. You have to kill Kiang and spread out before Subutai uses his first rain of arrows. Now this might mean some of your DPS have to save their cooldowns at the beginning of the fight if they're not ready for this burn. So when he spawns, everyone, including your melee, should be stood in front of Kiang in exactly the same spot, and you should try to have the 2 bosses directly on top of each other. This means that when they cast Annihilate or Volley, they'll always be facing in the same direction, so your raid can move away to avoid both. Volley usually comes first, and Volley is an arrow attack that hits 3 times, and each time it hits the arc is smaller and the damage is higher. Now nobody should ever get hit twice by this. Okay, watch what happens here. The mob starts to cast Volley and the raid runs through him. The tank stays on that side and simply sidesteps the Volley. This way, when he starts to cast Annihilate, it's still facing the same direction and the raid doesn't need to move at all. As soon as Kiang is dead, you need to spread out as fast as you can. Your range need to be 8 yards apart, and you should pick a spot and then not move so that you can maximize DPS. Don't just twitch around constantly trying to find a space. Subutai will always use Rain of Arrows and then volley a couple of seconds later. Only one person should ever get hit by the Rain of Arrows, and a paladin should free them with Hand of Protection. Anyone else that has abilities to get out of snares should use them. His other ability in this phase is Sleight of Hand. This is an 8-second buff that he gains, and if you hit him when he has it, you deal 50% less damage for a short time. If your DPS get this debuff, you're going to pretty much fail the enrage timer. Now when he does cast Sleight of Hand, have DPS stop on him immediately, and then have someone stun him. Once he is stunned, keep him chain stunned for the entire duration of the buff and you can DPS safely. Once he reaches 30%, one of the next 2 bosses will join the fight. This is where we use Bloodlust. Now if Zhan joins the fight, you'll have a little bit of an easier time. Have your tank pick him up and then keep him away from the other boss. You need 2 to 3 interrupters standing by ready to interrupt his charged Shadows ability. If this goes through, the extra damage it causes will probably kill him. Now he'll also be using Undying Shadows fairly early on. This creates a shadow ad and it fixates on a random player. This player just needs to kite the mob around the edge of the room away from melee. Eventually it should be killed, but finish off Subutai first. Now the other ability that Zhan casts is Shield of Darkness. This is probably the most dangerous ability in the fight. It's a shield just like Kiang's, but if anyone hits it with any ability, even an auto attack, it deals 300,000 shadow damage to the entire raid, probably causing a wipe. This shield also has 16 stacks, so it needs multiple dispels before it will disappear. Use all the spells you have to remove it as fast as possible, and do not let anyone hit him. People need to be able to stop and start DPS instantly. You can switch to the ad and DPS that temporarily whilst the shield is up. Okay, finally the last boss, Meng. Now he hits extremely hard on your tanks and can cause very high raid damage. He has two stances that he switches between every time his energy bar gets to full. Now in his first stance, Crazed, as his energy bar fills up, he deals more and more damage to your tank. Once it gains about 50%, he starts to hit extremely hard, almost hard enough to one-shot your tank. Now your tank needs to be doing everything they can to survive as this gets high, using defensive cooldowns, safeguards, even having a DPS run away and taunt for a few minutes before the tank taunts back. Heroic leap in anything they can to avoid his melee hits once it gets high. Now he'll also periodically cast an ability called Crazed Thought. This increases his energy by 10. When his energy is low, you should interrupt this as much as possible to keep it low. When it's high, allow the cast to go through uninterrupted, so that he resets his energy back to 0 and therefore goes into the next stance. In his second stance, Cowardice, you reflect any damage you do back to yourself. The percentage of damage reflected goes up the higher his energy is. When it gets over 60%, DPS can very easily kill themselves. Use your defensive cooldowns and be ready to stop DPS if you drop below 70% health. This is especially important if Maddening Shout is coming up. The Maddening Shout ability is exactly the same as it is on normal. Stack up an AoE in order to break the madness. Now as long as your DPS don't go too crazy and kill themselves and your tank use their cooldowns properly to stay alive, this is an easy burn phase. Just really focus on not killing yourself because it's surprising how quickly you can die when he's on high energy. For more guides, remember to subscribe, or you can watch me live on twitch.tv/Evrelia.